Assange. Free Julian Assange. Free Julian Assange. Free Julian Assange. Well, hello, I'm Chuck Zlatkin from NYC Free Assange, and I would like to ask our speakers to step up to the microphone. If you're on the list to speak, please come up and I'll introduce you and we can get started, at least with this first round. Okay, our first speaker, and to welcome everybody, is a civil rights lawyer and co-editor of the book In Defense of Julian Assange, Margaret Kunstler.
So today was the first day of the Assange extradition hearing, and this demonstration is one of more than 25 that are occurring worldwide. And thank you for joining in this demonstration and standing up for transparency, truth, democracy, and the people's right to know. Delivering real journalism is a risky undertaking with uncertain rewards, and truth has become a revolutionary thing. Assange has been set upon long distance for exposing war crimes, torture, and lies. This country accepts no national boundaries when it comes to enforcing domestic criminal law. Yet it is the same country that demands impunity as it rejects the international law that allows for UN investigation of human rights violations. I guess this is a good example of American exceptionalism. Assange is accused of espionage and faces a show trial under a law that has a lugubrious record. Everyone who has ever been tried under the law has been found guilty. There is no defense. WikiLeaks and Julian Assange are under the threat of extinction, but our rights are threatened too. Truth is what democracy cannot survive without. We need a free press, transparency. This is the single truth that was at the core of the First Amendment. Without a free press, power consolidates in secret, and without it, leaders become tyrants, despots, and democracy ends. Thank you.
Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange!
Our next speaker, you may know him from his years on RT. He's an actor and writer, and we're happy to have him here today, John F. O'Donnell.
Got the mic. Hi, everybody. How's it going? I'm John. Yeah, it's amazing. Give yourselves a round of applause for coming out to this tonight, huh? This is actually a very important social and political issue, and I very much appreciate you guys being here, and I'm proud and happy to get to speak just for a couple of minutes. For those of you guys who don't know, my name's John. I am not a journalist or a lawyer. I'm a comedian, so I am by far the least informed speaker that any of you will be hearing from today, so strap in for that. But that being said, I was a correspondent on the political satire show Redacted Tonight with Lee Camp for close to 5 years, and I'm very proud of the work that I got to do on that show. The niche of our show is that we cover stories that the corporate media is not touching at all, and if it's a mainstream story, we find the redacted or hidden angle of it. But unfortunately, part of my job was that I had to pay really close attention to the corporate mainstream media for close to half a decade, which kind of sounds like self-injurious behavior, because it is. Am I right? Everybody together. They are lying to us every day, and it's infuriating. It's treasonous behavior what they're doing. But guess who is not lying to us? Julian Assange is not lying to us. He is letting the American people and the greater global community know what is really going on. Through WikiLeaks, he's telling us the truth. He's allowing us to see what our government is doing in our name so we can stand up and say, no more. And beyond that, as much as the establishment government and as much as the mainstream media would like to say that anything that WikiLeaks has revealed is not true, they can't, because every document is the truth. Why are they so scared of the truth? It's infuriating. They're lying to us and manipulating us every single day. Now, real quick, I just want to tell you guys just about a few of their more grotesque mainstream media lies that I had to cover and pay attention to when I was working on Redacted, and now I really need to talk about it and get it off my chest, like this is some sort of weird, public speaking group therapy session for me. If that's cool, can we talk about it? All right, so first of all, I call this the Bana Alabed affair. Are you guys familiar with this girl Bana Alabed, who's been manipulated and exploited by our media in a sick, twisted way? This poor girl, she was 7 years old at the time when this was happening. She was a Syrian refugee living in Turkey, okay? And she would be put up in front of the camera, and she would phonetically speak in English, essentially calling for a regime change war in Syria, pulling at the heartstrings of Americans. It was very sad to see. Guess what it turns out? It turns out her parents are al-Nusra affiliates, straight up terrorists. Her father was one of the heads of a Sharia court in Syria. Unbelievable. Yet she goes on CNN and Jake Tapper interviews her and talks to her immediately before bringing on Tulsi Gabbard to berate her for going over to Syria and finding out that our government and the CIA is arming and funding all sorts of terrorist groups to have a regime change war. Unfreaking believable. It almost sounds like a conspiracy, but it's absolutely true. That's CNN, okay? Yet Julian Assange they're trying to extradite him to bring him to America. Well, he would never get a fair trial? No way. That's one story. Thank you. I feel a little bit better. Just been living with that. It's crazy. Another one, the New York Times, they have a podcast called The Daily. 5 million people listen to this a month. One of their most popular digital assets. Guess what? They sometimes, when they're talking about foreign policy stuff, they so manipulate the situation, the Venezuela situation. They brought on the Andes Bureau New York Times chief from down in South America and basically made the case for why we need to have a regime change war in Venezuela. And it's insidious because who's listening to that podcast? The mainstream liberal class is listening to that podcast. And you need to get them on board in order to manipulate enough of us to pull off a regime change war like that. That's two. The third one, the last story I did on Redacted. This shows how much the media is selectively disregarding important stories. Reuters, one of our main news wires, along with the AP. Reuters, they have an investigative wing that does deep dive journalism. And they found out this story about something called Project Raven, which is a bunch of our NSA assets, intelligence assets, freelancing as mercenaries working for the United Arab Emirates, using our newest hacking tool called Karma in order to spy on human rights activists there, and a number of Americans' information incidentally was picked up, trampling on our civil liberties. Reuters covered this, okay? And none of the mainstream media outlets picked it up. That is very, very telling when our own newswire puts resources into a huge story and nobody picks it up. And yet, comedians have to pick up the slack and cover that stuff? It's insane. It's truly insane. But you know who's picked up way more slack than most of us? Julian Assange has, and WikiLeaks has, and it's ridiculous and unfair. The idea of him being extradited here, where he could never get a fair trial, is unbelievable. He does not deserve to be extradited. He does not deserve to be fighting for his life. He deserves a medal. Thank you guys very much. Free Julian Assange.
Free Julian Assange. Free Julian Assange. Free Julian Assange. Free Julian Assange. Okay, our next speaker is a media lawyer and a member of the WikiLeaks legal team, Deborah Herbeck.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming out to support this really important cause. Maybe low doesn't work. Okay. Thank you. This is one of the most important cases of our lifetimes. As I speak, the opening statements are underway in Julian's extradition case in London. The extradition hearing itself will begin in May. The next several weeks are vital. Voices from the American public in opposition to extradition need to be heard loud and clear across the Atlantic. The WikiLeaks disclosures that are the subject of the indictment against Assange were a matter of public interest. If we don't show that we care about defending our democratic right to know what the US government is doing in our name, how can we expect a judge in England to care? Today, during the first day of opening statements, the US government presented its case for extraditing Julian Assange on an 18-count indictment that could land him in prison for 175 years. 17 of the 18 counts are under the Espionage Act, which has no public interest defense. If successful, this case will criminalize routine investigative journalism activities on the part of both journalists and publishers. Why the Espionage Act? The Espionage Act dates back to 1917. It was enacted during the First World War to deal with spies and saboteurs. Reporting on and publishing acts of the government, even embarrassing acts or war crimes, is not spying. It's not treason. It's investigative journalism. Never before has the Espionage Act been used in this way. This is the first time that a journalist or publisher has been prosecuted for publishing under this provision. This is a grave misuse of the statute, and it sets a dangerous precedent for any journalist or publication anywhere in the world who dares to report on or publish information that the US government decides is harmful to its interests. The Trump administration, in its ongoing vendetta against the media, is criminalizing investigative journalism. This is the kind of activity that goes to the core of our democracy, government accountability. President Obama was no fan of WikiLeaks, no fan of Julian Assange, no fan of leakers of government secrets, but he commuted the sentence of Chelsea Manning, the actual leaker, after only 7 years. And his Justice Department refused to prosecute Julian Assange or WikiLeaks. Obama understood that such a prosecution would present a New York Times problem. You couldn't indict WikiLeaks without also going after the New York Times and the Washington Post, who published the same material based on the same source. This does not concern the Trump administration. This is exactly what it wants: an excuse to criminalize the routine activities of the New York Times and the Washington Post and any other journalist or publisher who is anything other than fawning. As we watch the Trump administration dismantle every vestige of checks and balances provided by the US Constitution, we must stand strong and do everything we can to prevent him from tearing down the most important check on government overreach, the fourth estate, the press. We have seen over the past 3 years just how fragile our democracy is. A core part of democracy is government accountability. In a democracy, the public has a right to know what its government is doing. It is the job of journalists to find out what the government is doing and inform the public about it, exposing things that the government would prefer us not to know, even things that might be embarrassing to the government. How can we decide who we want to vote for if we don't even have a window to see what our politicians are doing when in office? Without government accountability and a free press, we have no democracy. The first act of any despot is to trample free speech and quash press freedoms and stamp out criticism. By demonizing the individual, Julian Assange, this government is trying to get one over on us. Julian's not a journalist, they say. WikiLeaks is not a publisher, they say. Okay, we say, and bam, because whether you consider Julian to be a journalist or WikiLeaks to be a publisher, the activities described in the indictment against Assange are routine activities of investigative journalism. If successful, it will set a precedent that will decimate press freedom. You can hate Julian Assange and WikiLeaks for releasing DNC and Podesta emails in 2016 that may or may not have impacted the 2016 election results. While there is no question that these emails were newsworthy and in the public interest, you can hate Julian Assange and WikiLeaks for not being partisan on behalf of the Clinton campaign. But the charges contained in the indictment that Assange faces now have nothing to do with 2016. Each and every count in the 18-count indictment, for which Assange faces 175 years in prison if he's extradited, relates to the release of the Manning leaks in 2010 and 2011. So what were these leaks that were so dangerous? Let's break this down and remind ourselves what this case is about. Each of the 18 charges in the indictment relates to the WikiLeaks publication of government documents and other materials, including video footage, that was evidence of war crimes committed by the US government. Chelsea Manning was disgusted by what she witnessed the government doing in Iraq and Afghanistan. She thought that when the public found out what was going on, there would be an outrage. The collateral murder video showed the US military, from the safety of a helicopter, shooting down and killing a dozen civilians, including 2 Reuters journalists. Several more were seriously injured, including innocent children. The collateral murder video put a face on the collateral damage that we hear so much about during wartime, the ugly underbelly of war. And there was more. The Afghan war diaries shined a light on the war crimes being perpetrated in our good name. The Gitmo files disclosed the terrible abuse being wrought on prisoners held by the US government in Guantanamo Bay. And it did make a difference. It made an enormous difference. Public support for the US war began to wane. But think about it. Nobody was held accountable for the actual war crimes that were uncovered by Manning and WikiLeaks. Rather, Chelsea Manning was imprisoned, and Julian Assange was pursued, indicted, and now faces 175 years in jail for exposing US war crimes.
Free Julian Assange!
Free Julian Assange!
Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange!
Over the past year or so, haven't we learned a thing or two about the importance of whistleblowers in connection with government accountability? And haven't we learned a thing or two about how badly we need to protect whistleblowers and provide a platform for their disclosures? WikiLeaks is primarily a distribution channel for whistleblowers, one where they can be assured that their identity as sources will be protected. It's also a resource for human rights attorneys and journalists and activists around the world to research and expose the atrocities that governments are perpetrating in the name of their citizens. This fight to prevent the extradition of Julian Assange is a fight for democracy. There can be no democracy without transparency. There can be no democracy without accountability. There can be no whistleblowers without a press brave enough to publish leaked materials when they are in the public interest. By prosecuting Julian Assange, the US government is literally trying to get away with murder. Where is the justice for the victims of American war crimes? Why aren't the war criminals being prosecuted? Why are we shooting the messenger? If you care about democracy, if you care about press freedom, if you care about safety for whistleblowers, you must support Julian Assange. It doesn't matter if you think Julian Assange's actions helped Donald Trump get elected. It doesn't matter if you believed Assange was a journalist or WikiLeaks is a news publication. This case sets a dangerous precedent for journalists and publishers. Good luck, New York Times, trying to distinguish the activities of your investigative journalists from those of Julian Assange in this case. Receiving classified information about US war crimes and trying to help the whistleblower cover her tracks to elude detection. Journalists solicit and receive classified information every day. It's called news gathering. Politicians deliberately leak classified information every day. If this activity is criminalized, the window into government activities is going to be closed shut. Julian Assange's right to publish is our right to know. If you value democracy, if you hate unjust wars, you must fight the extradition and prosecution of Julian Assange. Thank you.
Julian Assange. Free Julian Assange. Free Julian Assange. Free Julian Assange.
Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange!
Okay, before we bring up our next speaker, I'm going to do a a public service announcement on behalf of NYC Free Assange. Since last April or May, we've been having weekly vigils for Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning. We first started out in front here at the British Consulate, then we moved for a number of months in front of the New York Times building, and right now we're in Grand Central Terminal every Thursday afternoon from 4:30 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. in the main concourse right near the clock and the information booth. We give out flyers and hold signs, and we also show a version of the collateral murder video for people to see. So please join us. Our showing there is getting bigger and bigger as more people understand how important it is for them to get involved on behalf of Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning. And also people who are frustrated about wanting to know what they can do. Well, this is one thing that they can do. And you'll feel good about it, and you'll meet some interesting people and get to talk to members of the public on behalf of Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning. So that's Thursday, Grand Central Terminal, main concourse, 4:30 to 5:30 p.m. I'd like to bring up our next speaker. He's the editor-in-chief of The Independent, the radical newspaper now in its 20th year, John Talton.
Thanks. It's great to be here today with everybody. I think Deborah covered a lot of ground in her last speech, but I do want to go back and talk about a couple of things. This question, is Julian Assange a journalist or a publisher? My answer is absolutely. I mean, that's as someone who puts out a paper every month. What he has been doing, for the last 15 years, is amazing. Some of the most important journalism and publishing in the world. And I want to just take a moment to go back in time, back before Julian Assange was languishing in prison or detained in the Ecuadorian embassy, back before he became a pariah for some of the stuff that went on around the 2016 election, and think back to around 2007 or 2008, and think back to the first time you saw that collateral murder video of the U.S. troops in the helicopter gunning down the civilians and the journalists in Baghdad. And think for a minute what you felt when you saw that video. Because that video for a brief moment lifted the veil and gave us a real-time glimpse into what the U.S. occupation of Iraq was all about. So-called, Operation Iraq Freedom, right? That's what we were told it was, and we were building democracy and all the rest. And so that video, in journalistic lingo, that was an incredible scoop. And it was more than a scoop, it really gave us a chance to ask what on earth our government was doing in Iraq and why we were still there. And if anybody was wondering why the Iraqis were resisting the occupation, they had a chance to see that as well. And then what followed that, the Afghan war logs, the Iraqi war logs, the State Department cables, these were some of the most important journalistic exclusives, revelations of that era. And Julian Assange and WikiLeaks were responsible for that, as well as the incredibly courageous whistleblower, Chelsea Manning. And let's also remember when the Iraq and Afghan war logs were published, that was done in conjunction with the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, some of the world's most important and prestigious journalistic outlets were collaborating with Julian Assange because these were such important stories. In fact, in 2010, Assange was a runner-up for the Time Person of the Year. Again, long before he was this pariah, it was understood he was doing incredibly important work. And when he released the State Department cables, one of the things that helped spark was the Arab Spring, because in those cables it showed the U.S. ambassador in Tunisia being very candid in talking about how corrupt the regime was in that country, how the dictator and his wife and all his in-laws were basically looting the country every day. And I mean, the people in Tunisia knew they had a corrupt dictatorship, but when it was all put in their face by WikiLeaks, it became intolerable. And you had the young man who set himself on fire in the fruit vendor and everything that followed that. So again, it's an incredible journalistic legacy. You had these major media outlets that were more than happy to publish this stuff when it gave them front page scoops. Now, all these years later, Assange is being persecuted for this journalistic work he did. It obviously infuriated the national security state and all sorts of powerful people in this country, and I feel like it's shameful that, again, these outlets like the New York Times and the Washington Post treat this guy like a pariah now. And as an independent journalist, I certainly think all journalists should be in solidarity with Assange, not both for moral reasons because of the courage he exhibited in the past and the important work he did, but also for our own self-preservation. Do we think this government is going to stop at Julian Assange? Absolutely not. So I really applaud Chuck and everybody who's organized this and been out here day after day, or week after week. And we really have to keep the spotlight on this and not let Assange, some of the other controversies around Assange obscure the importance of this case and the importance of making sure the U.S. government is not able to try him on the Espionage Act and put him away for the rest of his life. Thank you very much.
Let's hear it.
Free Julian Assange!
Free Julian Assange. 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 Okay, our next speaker is a writer and editor of Haiti Liberté, Kim Ives.
Thank you, Chuck. Thank you, NYC Free Assange. And I think all the speakers up until now have pretty much hit all the major notes about Julian's importance, not just to freedom of the press, but to the world movement for change. I think Renata Avila, in the event that the Courage Foundation held last week, said it right. This is going to make it impossible to bring about change if they are able to muzzle Julian Assange, and hence by default the dominoes will fall and stop all press which have been carrying out these revelations. Now, the New York Times, The Guardian, Der Spiegel, Le Monde, they got a huge trove with the 250,000 U.S. State Department cables, but they actually did very little with it. They did a few stories. But this shows the evolution of Julian's thinking and, we could say, importance over time, because he wasn't content at that point to just let the matter go. He said, no, we have to get this information out. And so he came to all the media, or not all, but to many countries where information from the embassy was put out in the cables. And let's remind, this was not top secret. This was not the highest classification. This was just secret and classified. They were relatively low on the on the classification of on the security classification. But nonetheless, we got a glimpse into the role of these embassies. And so what they did was they went to all the countries affected, whether it was Pakistan, Ecuador, Brazil, Haiti. And in our case, we had the great honor at Haiti Liberté to be selected by WikiLeaks to be the partner to work with them in putting out these cables. These were 2,000 cables. Now, one point which John mentioned, but I'd like to re-emphasize, is this information, these truths are sparking revolution. In Haiti right now, there's a revolution underway. Yesterday, there was a firefight on the Chanmaz, the major square of town, between the police and the soldiers. It was a replay of 1917, a century ago, where essentially the armed forces are being swept up into the popular movement fighting this puppet government, this clown mafia that the Washington establishment has put in place. And I'm not just talking about the Trumpists. I'm talking about the globalists too, the Obama, Clinton, Bush globalists as well. They are all now being confronted with the aftermath of these revelations. And what were those revelations? The first article we did in Haiti Liberté with the 2,000 cables we got from WikiLeaks was about the Petro-Caribe Fund. Now, most of you, I can see, are veterans, so you probably know about the Petro-Caribe Fund, but this was one of the most spectacular projects of solidarity of the last century that we've ever seen, where basically Venezuela went to 17 countries and said, here, we're going to give you cheap oil. You don't have to go to the IMF. You don't have to go to the World Bank anymore. You can have your own fund. And Haiti would receive 20,000 barrels of oil a day, and they only had to pay 60% of it. 40% of it went into a fund called the Petro-Caribe Fund. Now, with the WikiLeaks documents, we broke that story about the Petro-Caribe Fund in the tooth and nail struggle that the U.S. State Department waged against the establishment of this fund. A woman called Janet Sanderson, who was then the U.S. ambassador in Haiti, came and did everything in her power to torpedo this, working with Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, the whole lot of them, to try to sink the Petro-Caribe Fund, which brought Haiti essentially a decade of, I won't say prosperity, but at least of maneuverability. But what happened was also foretold by the WikiLeaks releases, because Hillary Clinton, at the head of the State Department, was also fighting against the raising of the minimum wage in Haiti, which, does anybody know? $5 a day. $5 a day, not $15 an hour, $5 a day. And I think, did I have my going off? Okay, good. And so now,
got a microphone problem.
Yeah,
A second. Because, just give us a second.
Okay. Do we have a?
We're gonna need to get a battery.
We have a battery. We have a cold problem, but that's okay. I'll yell. Okay, you can hear me. So what happened was that they came and they fought tooth and nail. Even when the Haitian Parliament said we're going to raise the minimum wage from $3 a day to $5, from $2 a day to $5 a day, the State Department intervened with the president at the time and said, no, keep it at $3. Keep it at $3 a day. And this was revealed again through the WikiLeaks documents. Now, this has morphed into the revolution we see happening in Haiti today. This is what gave the movement of people the proof, the bona fides to be able to say, We are just in our demands. We are just in our cause, in our fight. And this wasn't all the corruption. We did a year worth of articles on the basis of those 2,000 documents about the death squad leader, Guy Philippe, who they were supporting. We have that in the documents. The support of the man they called Mr. 30% because he would always ask a 30% bribe. So this is Yuri Latrotu, who is trying to also take over this particular revolutionary upsurge in Haiti, or sabotage it. So thank you, WikiLeaks. As Julian used to say, courage is contagious. And I think the fact that we are all out here today, I see Margie Kunstler and the Courage Foundation doing a great event. I think the courage that Julian has shown us all to stand up and speak truth to power, that is an example that we have to defend tooth and nail. Yes. If we don't, we are lost. Thank you.
Thank you.
The work that we've been doing, if people were fortunate enough to attend the event last week at CUNY Law School, where we had great speakers, the Courage Foundation, and also working on all these events. Good? No, we don't have sound. We don't have sound, so we'll have to yell. So, one of the people who we've been working with on all of this, driving force, and is going to say a few words to put things in perspective for us about how we got to today and what this all means. He's the co-host of the show that we hear on WBAI, Law and Disorder, Michael Smith. Unfortunately, we have to go buy more batteries, so you're going to have to shout it out. We have no time. Okay, take it down.
I've just been informed that I have no batteries. Can you hear me? All right, I'll shout. I'm going to shout for 3 minutes. It's going to be a very short talk because I was just asked by Chuck a moment ago if I would speak. My name is Michael Smith. I have a radio show called Law and Disorder, and I've been active in the Julian Assange defense activities. What I want to talk about is Julian's right to publish and our right to know. And that is the essence of the First Amendment. The fact that we have a First Amendment is an extraordinary historical phenomena. People's right to listen and people's right to publish never existed in history before 1734. In 1734, a man named John Peter Zenger was publishing a newspaper a couple miles south of here. And in his newspaper, he criticized the colonial governor that was appointed by the King of England. He said the guy was corrupt. His name was William Cosby, Bill Cosby. He said he was corrupt. And he published an article in his newspaper saying he was corrupt. For that, he was indicted for libel. Truth was not a defense in those days to libel. He was put in prison just like Julian Assange, held incommunicado just like Julian Assange for 8 months. An old, sick lawyer from Philadelphia named Andrew Hamilton came from Philadelphia to New York to defend John Peter Zenger. This is 1734. He addressed the jury. He told the jury, "You've got a right to listen to this man's complaint. You've got a right to express yourself." Well, that was a new phenomena. People didn't have that right. But when the jury heard what Andrew Hamilton had to say, they agreed with him. The judge said to the jury, "You come back with a guilty verdict." The jury came back in 10 minutes with an innocent verdict. And that was the beginning of our First Amendment. In 1787, that became part of our Constitution. It was a fight, but it became part of our Constitution. That's what we're defending here. We are the patriots. Trump and his people who indicted Julian are the scoundrels. We're on the right side. We have history on our side. We have right on our side. We have justice on our side. Julian is a courageous figure, and we stand behind him to uphold the First Amendment, our right to complain, our right to listen, our right to transparency. Thank you.
Thank you.
Free Julian Assange! 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 If anyone's hiding Ben Norton, please let me know. We're waiting for him to speak. But while we wait for him, I'll say a few more words about NYC Free Assange and what's going on, what's been happening from the time that we first came out here in front of this building. I guess it was in April. Someone can correct me, for the weekly vigils. The response that we got at that time was truly hostile from the general public. People would come by, they would see what we were doing, and it wasn't even like we were getting rational responses from people. It was all emotion. They couldn't even really express why they hated us so much. It had to do with maybe that they felt that Julian Assange elected Trump. They felt that maybe it was because Julian Assange was a rapist. They felt that it was because Julian Assange threatened democracy. They felt it was because Julian Assange put American people at risk in other countries. And that was, I would say, almost maybe half the people or close to a majority of the people. People would walk by, they wouldn't take our leaflets, they wouldn't engage with us and talk whatsoever. We went over from here to the New York Times, where there was much more traffic. Lots of tourists, people coming by, going by, commuters, people going in and out of the New York Times building. And at first it was a similar response. And then, for whatever reason, I can't put my finger on it, even though I was there, all of a sudden the reactions changed. The first thing we found, we weren't printing enough flyers because all of a sudden people were taking the flyers. People were stopping and engaging us in conversation. People had questions for us to talk and to engage. And as I said to some people, I said, look at that. The middle fingers have all of a sudden transformed into thumbs up. And that's a tribute to my fellow people in NYC, Assange, that we came out there every week and in a sense felt either being ignored or abused. And then all of a sudden it changed. The attitude of people. They had an open mind to Julian Assange. They wanted to hear more. We began printing and getting out more information about the whole situation with Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning. And we began to see the numbers of people who would come out, to spend the hour and a half or hour with us grew. And now we're having some of our largest showings in Grand Central Terminal. And I would really suggest you don't have to be there every week. Maybe if you can only be there 1 week, to come out and experience the feeling of being with people from all around the metropolitan area who understand the importance of being there for Julian Assange and freeing Chelsea Manning. I mean, it's reduced down to the fact, and we talk about this to people in the streets, that the people who committed the war crimes, the people who ordered the war crimes to be committed, and the people who covering up the war crimes are all walking free with no problem. But Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning are in prison for getting us the truth, for telling us the truth. And who are they being gone after? By the same people who committed the crimes. So what we have to do is be able to be out there, speak to our friends and neighbors and coworkers, and people in our families and get this truth out there, that yes, we're there for fighting for Julian Assange, and we're there for fighting for Chelsea Manning. But basically what we're out there is fighting for our own freedom and our own freedom of speech. And it really is up to us. Because I know when it got to the point of coming out for what became NYC Free Assange, we were looking around. Who's putting on the demonstrations? What organizations are coming out in support of Julian Assange? And there weren't any. And we're in the New York metropolitan area, and nothing's being done. So we came out with 8, 10, 12 other people from all across the community, people from different organizations, longtime activists and first-time activists. And we decided we've got to come out there once a week and be there and showing, if only as a witness, but really it would begin to become beyond that. So people got involved, they brought new signs, they came up with the idea of, well, let's show at least an edited version, that to get it down in length, of the Collateral Murders video. And there we are every week in Grand Central Terminal in the main concourse, showing on the screen, having to hold up the projector because there are no tripods allowed in Grand Central Terminal, but they couldn't stop us. They tried to bluff us at first and say, oh, you need permits, you have to be here, you can't do this, you can't solicit and whatever. But in reality, that was personnel. The police there couldn't come and get in our way. So there we are, handing out our leaflets, holding our signs, showing the Collateral Murders video, and talking to people from all over the metropolitan area about the importance of standing up for Julian Assange, standing up for Chelsea Manning, but fundamentally standing up for freedom of press, freedom of speech, and our freedoms, because let's face it, if we don't, who is? And if not now, when? So thank you all for coming. We're going to continue in a few minutes, but this would be a good time to have some chanting that Jules going to lead you in.
Free Julian Assange!
Free Julian Assange!
Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Free speech! Free press! Free Chelsea Manning! Okay, folks, if you have been to Grand Central, we probably have your email. If we don't, please come to the table and give us your email so we can be in touch with you. If you would, this is right over by the table. A few words from one of the regulars, one of the core group, Priscilla Fidelia. Priscilla, go ahead, love.
We stand here today against the hypocrisy of the UK, the United States government, and their courts. If the UK allows a foreign journalist to be extradited to a country with the death penalty at the same time that the UK says it would never do so, that is hypocrisy. If a country, the US, won't grant a foreign journalist First Amendment rights, it has destroyed freedom of expression. That is hypocrisy. Political asylum is an international institution. Political asylum is not an agreement between two parties. It is a universal instrument. It is the right of every citizen on this planet who fears for their life for political reasons to seek it. By arresting Julian Assange and imprisoning him indefinitely, the British government and courts have violated that international human right. That is hypocrisy. Julian has said, the days when I could read and speak and organize to defend myself, my ideals, and my people are over until I am free. Everyone else must take my place. And that is what we are doing here today. We are being Julian Assange's voice, as well as all journalists who speak the truth. But Julian has not been silenced. His voice has only multiplied. Bernie Sanders has said, "The free press is never more important than when it exposes wrongdoing by the powerful." Thus, it is the sacred duty of journalists to publish what is truthful, newsworthy, and in the public interest. Julian Assange has done just that. He is an honorable and innocent man and must be released immediately. All right. British Council, the world is watching. How will you remedy the situation of corruption, illegalities, and torture that you have perpetrated upon an innocent man who has never been charged with anything? In the words of another great journalist and observer of Julian's plight, Jude Fleming has written, "The British court was weaponized to incapacitate Julian Assange. The political interference in the UK's judiciary is the direct cause of his current torture, lack of legal access, and due process. We stand here today with the whole world to tell you that we will not allow you to streamline his illegal exit from the UK to the equally perverted US justice system and government with its prejudice towards Assange. New revelations have revealed the political interference and collusion goes up to the highest level of the British courts, all the way up to the Prime Minister, the Crown Prosecution Service, and the Ministry of Justice. We will not allow these tactics to stand. This is a rigged case with a stacked deck. Counsel, your courts and government have orchestrated twisted and false mechanisms to deny Julian his human rights. It will not stand. Britain, you have abused your power. Your courts and government have withheld the truth, ignored the rule of law, prevented due process, operated in a cloak of secrecy, presumed guilt where there was none, all to deny an honorable and visionary journalist his right to freedom of expression and all other fundamental human rights that are guaranteed by UN covenants. What will your remedy be? The remedy can only be the dropping of the extradition case against Assange. The remedy must be Assange must be released. He must be granted safe passage, and he must be given an apology for the damage to his reputation. We want nothing less. The world condemns this attack on Assange and WikiLeaks, and we will continue to scrutinize the current situation. Hear, hear.
Free Julian Assange! 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 Free Julian Assange!
Okay, excuse me, I just want to bring back Margaret. The consul is going to say a few words for you. Thank you.
How's that? Can you hear me? Yes. So today was the first day of Julian Assange's extradition hearing. Today, more than 25 demonstrations like this are taking place all over the world. Thank you for joining in this demonstration and standing up for transparency, truth, and democracy, the people's right to know. Delivering real journalism is a risky undertaking with very uncertain rewards, and truth has become a revolutionary thing. Assange has been set upon long distance for exposing war crimes, torture, and lies. This country accepts no national boundaries when it comes to enforcing domestic criminal law. Yet it's the same country that demands impunity as it rejects the international law that allows for UN investigation of human rights violations. I guess this is a good example of American exceptionalism. Assange is accused of espionage and faces its show trial under a law that has set a lugubrious record. Everyone who has been tried under the law has been found guilty. There is no defense. WikiLeaks and Julian Assange are under the threat of extinction, but our rights are also threatened. The truth is that a democracy cannot survive without free press, without transparency. This is the single truth that was at the core of the First Amendment. Without a free press, power consolidates in secret. Without it, leaders become tyrants and despots, and democracy ends. Thank you.
Okay, I want to announce that there's a rally, Free Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning, no U.S. extradition, Tuesday, March 3rd, 6 o'clock, the NYU Kimmel Center staircase, 60 Washington Square, open to the public. I also think it's appropriate for a few of the people who are out here every week to say a few words. Some of us look as old as we look. Some of us also aren't as old. Dan? Gonna say hello. It's time for you to say a few words.
Hello. Hi. John Pilger on Julian Assange. WikiLeaks was not the first to call out the pattern of criminal lying in democracies that remain every bit as rapacious as in Lord Curzon's day. The achievement of the remarkable publishing organization founded by Julian Assange has been to provide the proof. WikiLeaks has informed us how illegal wars were fabricated, how governments are overthrown, and violence is used in our name. How we are spied upon through our phones and screens. The true lies of presidents, ambassadors, political candidates, generals, proxies, political fraudsters have been exposed. One by one, these would-be emperors have realized that they have no clothes. It has been an unprecedented public service. Above all, it is an authentic journalism whose value can be judged by the degree of apoplexy of the corrupt and their apologists. As a reporter in places of upheaval all over the world, I have learned to compare the evidence that I have witnessed with the words and actions of those with power. In this way, it is possible to get a sense of how our world is controlled and divided and manipulated. How language and debate are distorted to produce the propaganda of false consciousness. When we speak about dictatorships, we call this brainwashing, the conquest of minds. It is true, we rarely apply to our own societies, regardless of the trail of blood that leads back to us and which never dries. WikiLeaks has exposed this. That is why Assange is in a maximum security prison in London, facing concocted political charges in America. That and why he has shamed so many of those paid to keep the record straight. Watch these journalists now look for cover as it dawns on them that the American fascists who have come for Assange may come for them. Not least those on The Guardian who collaborated with WikiLeaks and won prizes and secured a lucrative book and Hollywood deals based on his work before turning on him. In 2011, David Lai, the Guardian's investigations editor, told journalism students at the City University in London that Assange was quite deranged. When a puzzled student asked him why, Lai replied, "Because he doesn't understand the parameters of conventional journalism." But it's precisely because he did understand what the parameters of the media often shielded vested and political interests and had nothing to do with the transparency of the idea of WikiLeaks was so appealing to many people, especially the young, rightly cynical about the so-called mainstream. And if there is any sense of justice left in the land of Magna Carta, the transparency that is the case against this heroic Australian must be thrown out. Or beware, all of us. Every single act of support is tremendously important. Cell phone petition, please sign. nycfreeassange.org. I thank you.
Okay, I'm bringing back to say a few words to us, Attorney Deborah Herbeck.
Good afternoon, everyone. How wonderful to see so many of you gathered here at the UK Consulate to support Julian Assange. This is one of the most important cases of our lifetime. As we speak, the opening statements are underway in Julian's extradition case in London. The extradition hearing will happen in May. The next several weeks are vital. Voices from the American public in opposition to extradition need to be heard loud and clear across the Atlantic. The WikiLeaks disclosures are the subject of the indictment against Assange, and they were a matter of public interest. If we don't show that we care about defending our democratic right to know what the US government is doing in our name, how can we expect a judge in England to care? Today, during the first day of opening statements, the US government presented its case for extraditing Julian Assange on an 18-count indictment that could land him in prison for 175 years. 17 of the 18 counts are under the Espionage Act, which has no public interest defense. If successful, this case will criminalize routine investigative journalism activities on the part of both journalists and publishers. Why the Espionage Act? The Espionage Act dates back to 1917. It was enacted during the First World War to deal with spies and saboteurs. Reporting on and publishing acts of the government, even embarrassing acts or war crimes, is not spying. It is not treason. It's investigative journalism. Never before has the Espionage Act been used to punish or prosecute journalists or publishers in this way. This is a grave misuse of the statute, and it sets dangerous precedents for any journalist or publication anywhere in the world who dares to report on or publish information that the US government decides is harmful to its interests. The Trump administration, in its ongoing vendetta against the media, is criminalizing investigative journalism. This is the kind of activity that goes to the core of our democracy, government accountability. President Obama was no fan of WikiLeaks, no fan of Julian Assange, no fan of leakers of government secrets, but he commuted the sentence of Chelsea Manning, the actual leaker, after only 7 years. And his Justice Department refused to prosecute Julian Assange or WikiLeaks. Obama understood that such a prosecution would present a New York Times problem. You couldn't indict WikiLeaks without also going after the New York Times or the Washington Post, who published the same material based on the same source. This does not concern the Trump administration. This is exactly what it wants. an excuse to criminalize the routine activities of the New York Times, the Washington Post, and any other journalist or publisher who is anything other than fawning. As we watch the Trump administration dismantle every vestige of checks and balances provided by the Constitution, we must stand strong and do everything we can to prevent him from tearing down the most important check on government overreach, the fourth estate, the press. We have seen over the past 3 years just how fragile our democracy is. A core part of democracy is government accountability. In a democracy, the public has a right to know what its government is doing. It is the job of journalists to find out what the government is doing and inform the public about it, exposing things that the government would prefer us not to know. How can we decide who we want to vote for if we don't even have a window to see what our politicians are doing when they are in office? Without government accountability and a free press, we have no democracy. The first act of any despot is to trample free speech and quash press freedoms and stamp out criticism. By demonizing this individual, Julian Assange, the government is trying to get one over on us. Julian's not a journalist, they say. WikiLeaks is not a publisher, they say. Okay, we say, and bam. Because whether or not you consider Julian to be a journalist or WikiLeaks to be a publisher, the activities described in the indictment against Assange are the routine activities of investigative journalism. If successful, it will set a precedent that will decimate press freedom. You can hate Julian Assange and WikiLeaks for releasing DNC and Podesta emails in 2016 that may or may not have impacted the 2016 election results. While there is no question that these emails were newsworthy and in the public interest, you can hate Assange and WikiLeaks for not being partisan on behalf of the Clinton campaign. But the charges contained in the indictment that Assange faces now have nothing to do with 2016. Each and every count on the 18-count indictment, for which Assange faces 175 years in prison if he's extradited, relates to the release of the Manning leaks in 2010 and 2011. What were these leaks that were so dangerous? Let's break this down and remind ourselves what this case is about. Each of the 18 charges in the indictment relates to WikiLeaks' publication of government documents and other materials, including video footage that was evidence of war crimes committed by the US government. Chelsea Manning was disgusted by what she witnessed the government doing in Iraq and Afghanistan. She thought that when the public found out what was going on, there would be outrage. The collateral murder video showed the US military, from the safety of a helicopter, shooting down and killing a dozen civilians, including 2 Reuters journalists. Several more were injured, including innocent children. The collateral murder video put a face on collateral damage that we hear so much about during wartime, the ugly underbelly of war. And there is more. The Afghan war diaries shined a light on the war crimes being perpetrated in our good name. The Gitmo files disclosed the terrible abuses being wrought on prisoners held by the US government in Guantanamo Bay. And it did make a difference. It made an enormous difference. Public support in the US for the war began to wane. But think about it. Nobody was held accountable for the actual war crimes that were uncovered by Manning and WikiLeaks. Rather, Chelsea Manning was imprisoned and Julian Assange was pursued, indicted, and now faces a 175-year prison sentence for exposing US war crimes. Over the past year or so, haven't we learned a thing or two about the importance of whistleblowers in connection with government accountability? And haven't we learned a thing or two about how badly we need to protect whistleblowers and provide a platform for them in their disclosures? WikiLeaks is primarily a distribution channel for whistleblowers, one where they can be assured that their identity and sources will be protected. It is also a resource for human rights attorneys and journalists and activists around the world to research and expose atrocities that governments are perpetrating in the name of their citizens. This fight to prevent the extradition of Julian Assange is a fight for democracy. There can be no democracy without transparency. There can be no democracy without accountability. There can be no whistleblowers without a press brave enough to publish leaked materials when they are in the public interest. By prosecuting Julian Assange, the US government is literally trying to get away with murder. Where is the justice for the victims of the American war crimes? Why aren't the war criminals being prosecuted? Why are we shooting the messenger? If you care about democracy, if you care about press freedom, if you care about safety for whistleblowers, you must support Julian Assange. It doesn't matter if you think Julian Assange's actions helped Donald Trump get elected. It doesn't matter if you believe Assange was a journalist or WikiLeaks is a news publication. This case sets a dangerous precedent for journalists and publishers. Good luck, New York Times, trying to distinguish the activities of your investigative journalists from those of Julian Assange in this case. Receiving classified information about US war crimes and trying to help the whistleblower cover her tracks to elude detection. Journalists solicit and receive classified information every day. It's called news gathering. Politicians deliberately leak classified information every day. If this activity is criminalized, the window into government activities is going to be closed shut. Julian Assange's right to publish is our right to know. If you value democracy, if you hate unjust wars, you must fight the extradition and prosecution of Julian Assange. Thank you.
Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! We're going to have a few more words from some of the people who are out every week. Here's someone who's been instrumental to the success of NYC Free Assange, and he's going to say a few words. Eric R., I know him as.
Thank you. Okay, if anybody didn't get the John Pilger statement, I have been handing out a statement of an article, excerpts from the article by John Pilger, the great Australian journalist, that just came out yesterday. So if you don't have a copy of it, I want to say something about what he said. The Swedish case against Assange, records were falsified. There was never a charge of rape. The woman did not even charge rape. But the police reports were falsified. It may be that the entire Swedish case was a covert operation. The whole Swedish case, accusing Assange in the way that they did, and then the psychological operation that was launched on top of the Swedish case in the press against Assange. A psyop. A lot of people fell right for it because they are influenced by the mainstream news. The mainstream news picks up a fake story created by the CIA and then runs with it for 2 years in order to denigrate and blacken the name of a great world-class journalist. And that's what we have to understand. The American people are subject to psychological operations. It's legal in the United States to run psychological operations as if it were warfare against an enemy population. The law was changed several years ago by the U.S. Congress to allow psychological operations to be run on the American public. And this one is a prime example. This is what has happened. So anybody that continues to, believe the press reports, the blackening of the name of Julian Assange, think again. Okay, thank you.
Next speaker is also someone who's been a member of NYC Free Assange. His other group is the one of the co-sponsors of the organization. You see him all over at events and whatever, and he's an important part of making this a success. Marty Goodman.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Free Assange. Free Assange. Free Assange. Free Assange. Free Assange. There was a hearing today. I don't know if it's over, but it's going to be continuing. Trump's guy was in the courtroom trying to get Assange extradited on charges that are simply not true, turned out of thin air. He didn't do anything to violate the law. And just like people like Ellsberg in the 60s, he told the truth. He released the lies of our government during the slaughter in Vietnam and the secret war in Cambodia. There is nothing that this government of the plutocracy won't stoop to do. Lie, steal, and murder. And now we see more currently the tapes released by Julian Assange, thanks to Chelsea Manning, of U.S. troops mowing down civilians in Afghanistan, and in one famous video, killing 2 journalists. And no one has apologized for that. No one is giving aid to those families that lost loved ones. It's all been covered up, and thanks to Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning, the world is knowing about it and calling for an end to war. We have endless war throughout the world. There are dozens of U.S. bases, for instance, in Africa, under AFRICOM, set up by Barack Obama. There are so many curtains over what this government does, and Kim Ives talked about Haiti, and I've been there many times, and I know what's happened there. The most disgusting interventions by the United States, on top of its illegal occupation of Haiti, has been to suppress a raise in the minimum wage in Haiti. And pushing a gangster-connected ex-president on the Haitian people through manipulation by the 2 Clintons, Hillary and Bill. I could go on and on about Haiti, all the racist stuff under Bill Clinton and the refugees, but I don't have the time, of course. But I want to say that the world now is in rebellion. I just got back from France last month, where workers in the tens and hundreds of thousands have walked out on their jobs. And I'm a transit worker, and that strike was led by transit workers in France. Power to you guys and women of the transit system. The local and the regional rail went out and paralyzed the city. I was there. Nobody could even get a cab. Everybody's looking for some way to get around. I have an article in this month's Socialist Action newspaper that's been translated also into French. So check that out. I got it. So to wind up, I want to say that the lies and suppression of truth is endless under the system, the capitalist system, which pretends to democracy, but there is no democracy, as we see in the Assange and Chelsea Manning case. And also we see in the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal, who's been a prisoner of a racist frame-up since, I believe, 1981. And now there's a few glimmers of hope, and hearings coming up this Friday. Maybe if Suzanne gets up here, you'll learn more about it. Friday, beginning at 4 o'clock in Philadelphia, there's going to be another hearing in the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal, who is a journalist just like Assange. He was the people's journalist. So please come out for him. He needs our help just as well as Assange. So we want to build a mass movement around freedom for Assange, as we do for Mumia. But here we are defending Assange, and he's gone through all kinds of inhumanity. and it's been called torture by the UN rapporteur, Assange's treatment in the embassies, and now he's in jail facing all other kinds of injustices. So let's build a movement, take to the streets, stay in the streets. You guys in this embassy, you colonial bastards, listen to the American people who are rising more and more, and around the world. This is a global protest, mind you. Free Julian Assange. Free Julian Assange. Free Julian Assange. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty.
Okay, part of being successful in this work is to be transparent and honest. So for those of you who came to see our next speaker, he is indeed here from the gray zone, Ben Norton.
Hey everyone, thanks for coming out. I gotta say, as a journalist, this issue is one of the most important issues I can think of, but also as a U.S. citizen, this should be something that everyone should be angry about. And I get that people are working, but this is a pretty good turnout. So, I mean, give yourself a round of applause for coming out. And this is also, let's keep in mind, this is an international day of action because Julian Assange is right now he's going through a kangaroo court, an unjust trial. They're trying to throw him in prison for the crime of telling the truth. So I'm going to spend just a few minutes here talking about some of the truth that WikiLeaks and Julian Assange have exposed, because we have all been enriched by this. They have given a gift not just to us in the U.S., but to people around the world. They have given a gift to activists, to human rights activists, to democracy activists around the world, exposing the crimes of the U.S. government and what it's been doing around the world. So for anyone who's interested in what WikiLeaks has exposed, I would highly recommend further reading a book called The WikiLeaks Files. The WikiLeaks Files, which was published by Verso Books, has a variety of authors that looks into each different country and the WikiLeaks cables and what they exposed. One of the things that Julian Assange and WikiLeaks exposed, which is why the U.S. government, and not just Donald Trump, but many in the Democratic Party as well, want to throw him in prison and throw away the key as he rots in jail. One of the reasons they're so angry is because WikiLeaks exposed, one of the many things, how the U.S. government backed a military coup in Venezuela in 2002, overthrowing the democratically elected government of Hugo Chavez. We have WikiLeaks documents from the U.S. State Department and other agencies proving that the Bush administration helped orchestrate that coup, that was funding right-wing opposition groups that were carrying out acts of violence trying to overthrow the government. That is just one of the many things WikiLeaks has exposed. The war on Iraq. We now know, thanks to WikiLeaks, that the U.S. government was intentionally encouraging sectarianism, which gave rise to groups like Al-Qaeda in Iraq and ISIS. We know that thanks to WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks has enriched our understanding of the crimes of this government that claims to act in our interest, but of course it doesn't. And we have their own U.S. State Department cables that prove it. This is not just empty speculation, thanks to Julian Assange. So, when U.S. politicians from both the Republican and Democratic Party go on TV and say, Julian Assange is a spy, Julian Assange is responsible for whatever accusations they smear him with, that is a lie. They're saying that because Julian Assange has done the noble duty that the vast majority of journalists refuse to do. He has exposed the crimes of the U.S. intelligence agencies that we're now supposed to believe are protecting us. And now we can see that those same intelligence agencies, just as they led this campaign against Julian Assange, just as they led the campaign, this disinformation campaign against the leftist leader of the Labour Party in the UK, Jeremy Corbyn, helping to destroy his candidacy, now they're turning against Bernie Sanders. They're using the same smears they use against Julian Assange. The so-called intelligence agencies, who are clearly not very intelligent, say that Julian Assange is a Russian asset. There's no proof of this whatsoever. And now there's this other bogus story that Trump supposedly floated the idea of pardoning Assange if he agreed to say that Russia had nothing to do with the leaks. Yet another false story leaked by intelligence agencies, a series of false stories going back through The Guardian and all these corporate media outlets that have a kind of revolving door with intelligence agencies. Now they want us to believe that Bernie Sanders is a Russian asset. This is how they're trying to discredit this popular grassroots movement led by a leftist leader. And they want to say, oh, if you want Medicare for all, if you want health care, if you want free education, if you want these policies that people have throughout the world, it's because the Kremlin is manipulating you. And you have to go along with Michael Bloomberg. Michael Bloomberg, a Republican billionaire who oversaw a racist program terrorizing black and brown New Yorkers. This is the only tactic they have left. All they can do is smear these truth tellers, modern day Socrates like Julian Assange, leftist leaders like Jeremy Corbyn and Bernie Sanders saying the Kremlin wants them to be free from the gulag we've thrown them in. And you know what's so wild is hearing these corporate media outlets are now smearing Bernie Sanders, red baiting him, saying he said some good words about Fidel Castro, he visited the former Soviet Union, the gulag. Meanwhile, the U.S. is running the largest prison system in modern history. The U.S. has 5% of the global population, 25% of the world's prisoners. The U.S. prison system is larger than the gulag ever was at its height, but we're supposed to believe that Julian Assange and Bernie Sanders and all these figures, they're helping the evil Kremlin. No, I mean, this is the peak of hypocrisy. And Julian Assange right now is being tortured. That is not just my opinion. That is the view of the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture. The UN's leading expert on torture has said repeatedly that Julian Assange is suffering from torture. Just last week, 170 doctors from 18 countries published a major open letter in the medical journal Lancet saying that Julian Assange is being tortured and could be on the verge of being tortured to death. To death. So we, as people here in the U.S. and people throughout the world, need to be talking about this issue, need to be raising awareness about the fact that a journalist is on the verge of being tortured to death for the crime, the supposed crime of telling the truth, of exposing the actual crimes that the U.S. government has been carrying out in our supposed names. But these crimes don't represent us. We don't want these crimes to be committed. And the vast majority of people, I think, they understand that and can be convinced. But the problem is, corporate media outlets are telling people that Julian Assange is a Russian agent. Julian Assange is a hacker. These are lies. They need to be recognized as lies. We need to organize ourselves, organize our communities. You should speak to your friends, speak to your family members, speak to your neighbors, tell them what's happening, tell them to speak out, tell them to organize, because that's the only way any of this stuff is ever going to change. So finally, the most important thing we can do, even above all of that, is spread the word and the truth that WikiLeaks has revealed to us. Because even though Julian Assange is a political prisoner being tortured right now, and even though the U.S. government wants to throw him in a dungeon for the rest of his life, WikiLeaks is still publishing information about the OPCW chemical cover-up. They're still publishing information about a variety of issues. So WikiLeaks and its journalistic work continues because WikiLeaks is a journalistic organization, and its goal is to tell the truth, to expose the truth to the world, and no government can stop journalists like me, journalists like my colleagues, journalists like those at WikiLeaks from continuing to expose the crimes of these governments that claim to speak in our name but don't act in our interests. Free Julian Assange!
Free Julian Assange!
Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Okay, I want to thank everybody for hanging in there. I'd like to thank all the speakers we had today. We have one more speaker, but just a round of applause for Deborah Herbeck, Margaret Kunstler, Ben Norton, Kim Ives, John F. O'Donnell, John Talton, and Michael Smith. who had to speak without the benefit of the microphone. So as we're winding this down, and that's just for the time we're here, we're going to be continuing this continuously. And for those looking for something to do on Thursdays, 4:30 to 5:30 p.m., Grand Central Terminal, main concourse by the clock, and the information booth will be there. NYC of Free Assange for Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning. And here's one of the people who's been working with us and coming out weekly, and again is responsible for what we've been able to accomplish. And today, Patricia Dahl.
Greetings and solidarity to all of you who turned out today. Can we have a round of a shout out to people all over the world who also came out for Julian? Yay! We're here in front of the British Consulate for a reason. As many of you know, today was the opening of the trial proceedings for Julian's extradition. Just a few hours ago, the U.S. lawyer opened these proceedings by accusing Julian Assange of putting innocent people in harm's way. Let us remember that in 2010, Julian Assange went to the State Department to ask for their assistance in redacting the documents before their publication. That is a fact that doesn't get disseminated in the news. I think it's appropriate on this occasion I'm going to read to you Julian's exact words. It's important to get them verbatim, as that sign that the gentleman there is holding up. Julian's words have been silenced. So when he approached the State Department, he in 2010, he received this message from the counsel to the State Department, Hanju Ko, who replied, this was November 27th, 2010. We will not engage in a negotiation regarding the further release or dissemination of illegally obtained U.S. government classified materials. So Julian Assange replied with these words, and let us remember his words verbatim. I understand that the United States government would prefer not to have the information that will be published in the public domain and is not in favor of openness. That said, either there is a risk or there is not. You have chosen to respond in a manner which leads me to conclude that the supposed risks are entirely fanciful, and you are instead concerned to suppress evidence of human rights abuse and other criminal behavior. So today, as the U.S. Lawyers are making the case that it was Julian Assange who was cavalier about releasing the names, we have it in writing that it was the State Department who refused to give him lend their assistance in redacting the names. The same thing happened with The Guardian when Julian Assange shared with them generously what the former editor said was the trove of the scoop of the last 30 years. They were so happy to have it. Julian Assange asked The Guardian to delay the release of the material so that they all could have a chance to redact the names. The Guardian refused to help him, so that left Julian Assange to work alone, utterly alone, in an entire night to redact up to 10,000 names from his own estimation of what should be redacted. That doesn't get disseminated in the news. So this whole trial is beginning on a lie. And so the same thing happened with the Russia claims. Julian Assange in 2012 waived his resolute policy to never discuss the sources or anything to identify the sources, and volunteered to meet with Adam Schiff, who is very much in the news today, to reveal by forensic detail that Russia was not the source, and not by divulged personal names, which Julian Assange would never do because he does care about innocent people. Adam Schiff refused, and I have his quote here somewhere. Basically, he said that he would not meet with Julian Assange unless Julian Assange was in custody. And it's important to remember, too, on this day, that as Assange has been persecuted in what they call the Guantanamo of Britain, under conditions that we can't even fathom, we have no information to what they are subjecting him to other than solitary confinement. Let us remember that if this extradition goes through, he will be in worse conditions here in the U.S. because they've already revealed that he's going to be placed in special administration measures, which is an eerily vague term that it basically, as witnesses who have been under it and lawyers who have worked with people who have been classified under that term have said that it is worse than even the normal solitary confinement. As a recommendation, I think what we can all do is there's an excellent description of these special administrative measures. They call them SAMs, and it's online. The Center for Constitutional Rights wrote up. And I think if we all, take parts of that or put things into our own words and send it to the Home Secretary in Britain or the magistrates' courts, you can find ways to contact them and let them know that the people here know that if they go through with this extradition, they are subjecting Julian Assange to horrible treatment that will violate his human rights. By the way, under SAMS, it is allowable that the defendants and their lawyers, that their meetings can be observed by the FBI. And we all know that that's been going on illegally in the embassy with the CIA, that they've been spying on Julian Assange. So that would be legal here under the SAM-SAMS. So we have to remember how serious this extradition is. Thank you all for coming out. Let's carry on.
Okay, I want to thank everybody for coming, and since we still have a few minutes left on our time here, a number of people in the course of the day came by and asked if they could say a few words. So since we're out here fighting for free speech, the mic is available. Just keep it brief and let's get everybody in who wants to say something. So now's the time to step up. What? A quick, okay, there you go. Anyone else?
Okay.
See?
A Raging Granny song for Julian. Try. Okay. My country is in free. Where is our liberty? We protest now. Julian Assange did right, brought secret files to light. He's in prison, tortured day and night. We must free him now.
Okay. My brother, the mic is yours. Go ahead.
I think it's afternoon. Assalamu alaikum and blessing to all. My name is Shahid Comrade and I'm a Secretary General Pakistan USA Freedom Forum. And why I'm here? Because I am the product of the CIA-backed army dictatorship imposed in my country. So I know the value of the freedom of speech, because this is the only solution to move forward in the future. We are here in front of the British Consulate, my former colonialist, who stole all values of the humanity against all decency of the humanity, the Queen of Elizabeth, one of the queen of the dacoits and the looters and colonialists, and they still don't feel any shame. So we are here because Mr. Julian Assange is under front of the court in British court and fighting for his life. And what's his crime? His crime is which hate by every racist, fascist, Naziist, Hindu, extremist, Modi, and our president, who's one another symbol of the backer of the occupation in this world. Last every 100 years, every occupation is backed by the United States government, not by you, not by me. Right. And being a Muslim, being an immigrant, and being a worker, this is my right to ask you the help, and I don't feel any shame. Because you and me, this is our job and this is our duty. And we are proud. And thanks very much to the organizers in New York City who give me honor, who give me the chance to say what I want to say for the best of your kids and my kids. I want to ask you, keep this movement alive, but we already suffered by the McCarthyism 1950s. Then we came a good part, little part of journalists, credit goes to journalists and attorneys. But I'm sorry to tell you, this is the reality, and being a strong people, we have to face the effects and the reality. Our United States education system, our journalist system, journalism attorneys, and attorneys. How can you talk about any attorney and justice system in this country when the Afia Siddiqui in a jail for 86 years, the crimes he never committed? Only criminals got in the court and jury gave it 86 years, and Judge Berman feel proud. How can you say something about the justice system and feel a bar council proud when there is a Guantanamo Bay? The shame and the slap on the face of the justice system, Guantanamo Bay. Only one thing, the Julian Assange has a crime, because he shared the truth with you, because he trusts you. And anybody who do the same thing, be ready to face the trial. Yes, we are ready. Pakistan USA Freedom Forum salute every guys who stand for the First Amendment. And thank you very much, you sir, for your efforts. Every Thursday, Grand Central, 4:30. Be there and let's stand for the justice and freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is the main thing for the future of this country or any country. Otherwise, we will be the part of the history and the bad part of the history. Thank you very much, and you all are the heroes.
Okay, we're now 1 o'clock. I have an announcement. Eric needs help with that matter on the 6th train. If anyone's planning to go downtown on the 6th train after this and can help him out, go see Eric. I mean, that's what it is to have a grassroots movement. That's just the people involved. We also have these very handy green flyers that you can pass on to people about Thursday, Grand Central Terminal, the main concourse near the info booth. Defend Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning, freedom of the press. We're there every Thursday for 1 hour. Please join us when you can. It's a growing movement, and we need people to be there. You want to say one thing? Okay, if you haven't signed up for the mailing list here on the clipboard, if you write to the address NYC Free Assange, you can get on Gmail, you can get on the list. Want to say something quickly? Because we're over time now.
I just want to say, when you yell free Julian Assange, you're really yelling, make sure we're all free.
Free Julian Assange. 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 Free Chelsea Manning. Free Chelsea Manning. Free Chelsea Manning. Free Chelsea Manning. Free Julian Assange. Free Chelsea Manning. Free Julian Assange. Okay? Free the truth. All right, thank you to everybody who came to speak, everybody who decided to speak after they got here. Remember Thursdays. I want to thank all of you, but I must say a special thanks to the people in NYC Free Assange who've come out every week for months, have kept this movement alive in New York City, and are about to have the joy of watching it grow into a real mass movement. Thank you all for coming.